Hello, I'm Laura Knights, CEO of Knights Consulting, creator of BlackWomanLeading.com, and the host of Black Woman Leading, the podcast. This podcast amplifies the needs and experiences of Black women leaders in the workplace with a holistic focus on three core areas: leadership development, mental wellness, and relationship management. Our ultimate aim is to help Black women learn, heal, and grow in their leadership capacity. Before we jump into this next podcast episode, I wanted to invite you to the 2025 Black Woman Leading Live Conference and Retreat, taking place May 27th through the 30th, 2025 in Virginia Beach. Now, if you haven't heard, Black Woman Leading Live is the premier leadership development conference to help Black women professionals learn, heal, and grow in their leadership capacity. Imagine a community of Black women leaders from across the country supporting you as you clarify your career growth strategy, work on refining your leadership skills, and make a plan to tend to your mental health and self-care. Yes, we do all of that at this transformational, professional, and personal development experience designed by Black women for Black women. Now, activities will include workshops, panels, wellness breaks, laser coaching, networking, action planning, and some fun community events. And at the 2025 event, in addition to our overall focus on your career development and holistic wellness, we'll dive a little bit deeper into the critical leadership competency of strategic communication. Every effective leader has gained some mastery of strategic communication, and we want to help you to do the same. So yes, we're going to get into all of this, and sis, you need to be there. Get all the details and save your seat at www.bwlretreat.com. Welcome to this episode of the podcast. Today, we're talking about building trust on the team. Now, before we jump into the content of this episode, I do want to make the connection to our Season 6 theme, Community Care is Critical. Often I have heard well-intentioned but misguided leaders refer to their team as a family. We're a family. We're just like a family here. And no, you're not like a family at work. It's a different thing. However, especially if you feel that there is some connection with your team or with the people that you work with, a better way that I prefer to talk about it is a community. Your team is like a community, because a community is a group of people that are in proximity to each other and often have something in common. And so if we think about your team as a type of a community, and community care is critical, then there is a way that we can infuse care into our team so that we can work better together and so that we can achieve the goals that we have to accomplish together as well. So that's where we're coming from with this episode. Now, why trust? Why focus on trust? If you look at any of the research about high performing teams, and by a high performing team, we mean a group of people who share goals, metrics, key things that they need to accomplish. And they do that through working together, through challenging each other, through holding each other accountable to achieve outstanding results. So that's a high performing team. If you look at any of the research around team effectiveness or a high performing team, you will find that every single piece of research points to trust as a foundational piece that's needed for the team to do everything else that makes them high performing, achieve results, have accountability, commit to the goals that they're working on. So when we invest in building trust on our team, it gives us a return on investment, not only interpersonally, but also quantitatively in things like the bottom line, hitting the KPIs, all of that stuff. Okay. So that's why we're focusing on this building trust as a team. Building trust on the team has two elements to it. There's an interpersonal element and there's also a system element. We can think about it as the software and the hardware. So I want to give you some insight on that. And if you are a leader who has influence to really guide the team, to infuse activities and your own behavior to build trust, then I want to give you some insights on that. But let's say you are not a leader that has influence on the team. You're part of the team, but maybe you don't have a lot of influence, power, or authority on the team. There are still some insights you can pull from this information today on how you can help to cultivate trust as a member of the team. Or if you are feeling a lack of trust as a member of the team, what are some ways that you might advocate, ask for support, or evaluate this situation for yourself? Okay, so that's where we're going. Before we dive into it a little bit, though, let me give you a disclaimer. When we are talking about this stuff we can do as leaders or as members of the team to build trust, I am assuming that this is not a toxic workplace that we're talking about. And by that, I mean an environment that is causing you harm, either to your professional opportunities or to your mental health. If it is excessive disrespect, or you are experiencing the results or the residual effects of an environment where racism or sexism is running rampant, where there's disrespectful leaders, a lack of care or concern for your time, all of those things that are actually harmful for you. I'm not talking about making it work there. If you don't think that situation is salvageable, then I would tell you to get out of there. I'm not encouraging you to try to make something work that is literally stressing you out and negatively impacting your well-being or mental health. So let's be clear, that's not what we're talking about. But if this is an environment that is relatively healthy, right? All environments have something. Nothing is perfect, but that you feel like this is something where you can exist, where you can grow, where you can even thrive as a professional, then that is what we are talking about today. Okay, so let me give you a few definitions before we get into what are some things we could do to build trust on that interpersonal side, software, or on that more system structure side, hardware. So 2 definitions. They are often conflated, but they are not the same. I like to think of them as siblings, if you will. So there is trust and there is psychological safety. Okay. Trust is interpersonal, me to you. So between, let's say, 2 people, let's say we work together. I have trust that I can talk to you. I can ask for help. I can confide in you about things that are appropriate to the workplace. All right. So trust, interpersonal, me to you. All right. Psychological safety, we can think about as trust kind of elevated to the group or environmental level. So it's more about, is this space safe for me to take interpersonal risks, such as share my ideas, ask for help, challenge the status quo in the interest of getting to a better outcome or a possible better result, right? And so I read something the other day and I love the way that they put it. They said trust is me feeling like I can give you the benefit of the doubt and taking a risk. So if I have to share something with you personally, if I have to ask you a question personally, that I will take that risk because I trust that there is some engagement between us that makes that safe. And then they said psychological safety is your belief about if others will give you the benefit of the doubt, right? In this environment when you come to bring something. And so they're both needed. But what we find is that trust, and that this trust that is developed between individual people, actually creates the groundwork for psychological safety at the group or the team level to exist. Okay. So we're focusing on this interpersonal thing, me and these people that I work with. But as a collective, when these things exist, we're able to have this psychological safety at the group level. So I hope that makes sense. This individual, this group piece, but they kind of act in tandem together to create this workplace environment. Okay. So let's go back to trust and break down some of the elements of that. Trust is often like one of those big smushy words like love, right? That everyone can have their own definition for it. But when we look at some of the research around trust in the workplace, we find that it generally has three kind of components or elements to it. I really love sharing and breaking this down to leaders because it can give you a diagnostic tool when you're working with folks and you're like, I don't know, something is there and I don't quite trust it, but you don't have language for it. Not having language for why you feel that way makes it difficult for you to give some constructive feedback, for you to advocate for yourself, for you to set a boundary, for you to ask for them to do something. So let's break down these three different elements of trust, interpersonal trust. And as I'm walking through these, I want you to think about the people that you work with. Think about if you trust them or if you don't trust them. And based on that, when I go through these three elements, I want you to see if you can find which one is the lever that's either supporting you to trust them or that may be detracting from your ability to trust them. So the first thing is about their competence or their capability. So we trust that they have the skills, the expertise, the experience to do the job or the role that they hold and to do it well. So I trust that you know what you're talking about. Okay. So capability or competence. The second one is this sense of reliability. Sometimes the literature even talks about it as integrity. So there's consistency. So not only do I trust that you can do it, but I know that you're going to show up. If you say you're going to do it, I can count on that because it's predictable. You've done it in and out, day in and day out. You said you were going to have it done by the deadline. You got it done by the deadline. You said you were going to reach out and do this, and you reached out and you did that, right? So there's this consistency that creates some reliability that makes their engagement with you predictable versus, just all over the place or uncertain. So we've got competency, a trust in your skills and expertise. And we've got this consistency or that there's integrity in your work and that there's reliability that you bring. So those are the first two. The third one is this sense of caring or benevolence, meaning a human element that I have a sense that you don't mean me harm in the workplace, right? That you're not going to throw me under the bus as soon as I walk out the room. That generally you want me to do well in the role, because why wouldn't you want me to do well? Because if we're a community or a team, if I'm doing my part well and succeeding, then that means you're probably succeeding and we as a team are succeeding. So those three. Competency or my capabilities, consistency, my reliability, and then three, this caring or this benevolence, this human element that generally like you want me to do well. You mean me no harm, that kind of thing. So if you think about those three elements, think about the people that you work with. If you trust them, which levers do they push for you? Okay, because this is giving you some context to what's happening in your interpersonal relationships at work. If you don't trust them, can you point to which one of those levers that might be missing, right? And when we look at it, which one would you say has the biggest weight? What would you say? It's the caring or the benevolence, right? Because if I know you can do the job, if I know that you are reliable, but if I don't know if you're going to throw me under the bus when I walk out of the room, am I still going to trust you, right? So one of the things we can use that as a diagnostic to evaluate our relationships with others in the workplace, but we can also use it as a self-assessment tool to say, hey, am I trustworthy, right? Am I instilling people's ability to have trust in me at the workplace based on those things? Is there something that I need to do to either step up my competence to increase my reliability or to demonstrate the benevolence or caring aspect of my personality and my engagement with people? Okay, so we have the breakdown of trust. And so how do we now start to cultivate more trust on the team? And I'm going to talk to you first as if you are a leader that has some influence to support trust building on the team. Now, by leader, I think broadly about leaders. So that doesn't mean that you have to be the boss of everybody, but that you have some influence. You have the capacity to influence something is the definition of a leader that I normally use. So let's talk about from the leader perspective. If you feel like, no, I don't have the capacity to influence, think about it as a member of the team. What ways might you contribute to this kind of environment so that trust can live there? Okay. So let's go through these. So I mentioned earlier that there are two parts, right? There's this software that's more our interpersonal, how we engage with people that helps to build trust. And then there's this hardware element, which is about the systems and the structures of, how we are engaging, our ways of working, how information is shared that also enables trust to be built on a team. So let's first talk about the software or the interpersonal side. So on the interpersonal side, I'll first say, if you are a leader, a rule of thumb with building trust on the team is that you go first. Everything that you are asking other people to do, because demonstrating trust, building trust is a vulnerability exercise. It's risk. You're putting yourself out there in some ways, exposing yourself in some ways. So if we're asking that of others, we then have to model that as leaders. So first, you go first, meaning you have to listen a lot. You have to give people an opportunity to share their ideas, their feelings about things, right? And so we have to facilitate that. But we also go first by sharing our ideas, our feelings, by acknowledging when we made a mistake, right? And making the steps to fix that and doing that in a way that people can see that and see that that's part of how we do things here on this team. So you go first. The other thing with the you go first is modeling this sense of curiosity, right? When we come to situations with curiosity, then that allows us to diffuse any artificial harmony. Artificial harmony is when there is clearly things that people want to say, or they disagree, or they don't like the way things are going. And they might present in the meeting like, yeah, that's fine. And then they leave the meeting and all the kind of water cooler chatter about things that they don't like. That's artificial harmony. We want to get away from that. And so having those opportunities where it is safe that we talk about hard things here, that we model saying, you know what, I don't think that I agree with that. Can I offer another perspective? And making that part of what we do as a leader, when you demonstrate that and you invite other people to do that without, faces getting twisted up, without, all manners of resistance, then it just becomes something that we do. And if we go back to the research around high performing teams, we know that trust building is foundational, but then what trust lays the foundation for is healthy conflict. And that is not personal conflict, not personal attacks or things of that sort, but it's more so around ideological conflict, meaning we can play devil's advocate on ideas, not to just be jerks to each other, but because this diversity of ideas, this synergy of ideas then supports us to get to the best possible outcome. And so in the show notes, I'll put a couple of resources if you want to read more on this stuff so you can learn a little bit more. So the main thing on the software is that you go first. Everything that we're talking about, especially if you are a leader with influence, everything that we're talking about, you have to demonstrate it. You cannot ask anybody to do what you are not already demonstrating that you are willing to do. Okay. So you're modeling curiosity, you're listening, you're going first, admitting your own infallibility. If you made a mistake, if you overlooked something, so that then it becomes a space where it's okay for us to not be perfect, not be robots here. Right. Okay. So that's first. You go first. Now, the other thing it seems like common sense, but it's a light bulb moment I see for a lot of the leaders that I get to work with. And it's really about checking in with people about what they need. Huge, 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 huge trust builder. So one activity that I love to do with teams is called my user manual. And what you do in that exercise is people have a moment, to either before they come in for the team building session or whatever, in the moment, a little reflection time. And they are filling out a few prompts about themselves. And you could mix up the prompts, but the prompts are generally things like how I prefer to receive feedback. Something that really energizes me about the work, something that really frustrates me, ways I like to receive support. So it's, you think about the user manual for your TV or your microwave or whatever electronics you have, and it tells you how to work those, appliances. Well, this user manual is the person giving their team members their kind of operating points, how they work. And we do this as an exercise to learn about each other, to learn about each other interpersonally, but also how we might engage with people to support them to build trust. So one of the ways you do this interpersonally is you ask people. You ask people what they need. You ask people how they like to be engaged with. You ask people what frustrates them, what really energizes them and helps them to do their best work. Okay. Seems like rocket science, right? It's not rocket science, but it's not always intuitive to do that for people either. Okay. So one, you go first, modeling curiosity, admitting your own infallibility. Two, then asking people, like, what do they need to be successful? On that same point of kind of asking people what they need to be successful is a point that we can pull from the research around vulnerability. So we know that vulnerability is the rocket fuel for building trust. And so does that mean we need to be at work telling all our deep, dark secrets? No, that does not mean that. But it means, are there opportunities for people to have these vulnerability based sharing moments? And what that means simply is, how do people get to know each other as human beings outside of just their role, their title, and their job description? So when we have moments for people to have informal connection, eating lunch together, or even more formal team builders or team retreats, or just, time virtually before the meeting starts if we're all remote, to check in on the weekends. Now, I know everybody doesn't, not check in on the weekends, check in about what you did over the weekend, right? I know everybody's not into small talk. Some people, their behavioral preference is, let's just get right to it. But we do know there is some value from people having human connection time that supports their ability to build trust. When I get to know you as a human being, not just as the engineer for the team, not just as the manager for the team, it allows that vulnerability based sharing, getting to know you as a human being, allows some trust to develop there over time. Okay. So creating space for that, if you're a leader, facilitating that for your team. If you're part of the team, being open to sharing what's appropriate. Like, it doesn't have to be oversharing. Boundaries are good, right? But being open to sharing those small things about yourself and hearing those things about your colleague, we know that those things are major trust builders as well. Okay. So you see why we call this the software. It's very nuanced things, but we do know that it's supporting that trust building. And the last two things I'll say on the interpersonal side or the software side, one is maximizing team differences. So when we think about difference of perspective, when we think about multiple intelligences, we love at Nice Consulting to do work with the DISC assessment. So you learn about people's behavioral preferences and their different communication preferences, that we can really maximize these things. In DISC language, we call it creating a DISC power team. So it's not about everybody has to all be the same, but if we know that some people are more analytical, if we know some people are really the life of the party and they want to be social and connect in that way, how can we maximize those different giftings in service of the team? So looking for ways to maximize that, looking for ways to give people work that motivates them and that energizes them is a way that we build trust too. And then finally, again, building trust is not all rainbows and unicorns, right? We know that there are real challenges that happen on teams, even high performing teams, even well connected teams. And so one of the ways that you can build trust is by creating structures that make it okay to have the hard conversations. So what do I mean? Some of that is the you go first stuff. So being clear as a leader that we can address hard things, that we can give constructive feedback, and it's not going to make things weird, right? We model that. But the other thing, and I'm starting to move a little bit into the hardware, the other thing is building in structures where this becomes part of our ways of working. So I'll give you an example. There's a team that I work with, and in their weekly team meeting, they have a standing item on the agenda that's like bones we need to pick. That's what they call it. You know that saying, bone, I have a bone to pick with you, meaning there's a challenge or there's an issue I need to discuss. They have that as a standing bullet point on their agenda where people bring things. And it's not has to be a confrontational thing. It's things like people saying, this didn't work for me this week, or when we did this project, this piece, I had a challenge with. So all of those bones are not interpersonal. Sometimes it might be about the work. It might be how we organize the work, but they have operationalized talking about difficult things that it's not weird. You see people come into their meetings like, oh yeah, I forgot to send my bone to pick to add to the agenda. It's just part of how they do things. So they have neutralized challenges or difficult conversations to the point that they're able to have them. And because people know that there's a space for them to discuss the challenges and people are not going to retaliate or now have an attitude or not want to eat lunch with them anymore, whatever the thing is, that it has really elevated the trust on that team. Okay. So those are some interpersonal things when we think about the relationships with people. Now, this is not exhaustive. I'm just giving you some high level things that can support you to build trust on the team or to help to cultivate that if you're part of the team. Now, let's go to the hardware stuff and talking about some of the systems and structures. Now, a lot of times when we think about building trust or psychological safety, which is that group level trust, if you will, we think about just the interpersonal things that I was talking about. But what we know from the research is that the other things that support, so we can have great interpersonal relationships. I can have a lot of interpersonal kind of feeling like you're going to support me, feeling like you want me to win, and still have low levels of trust or psychological safety. And what would account for that was some of the structural things. So for example, if people get along really well interpersonally, but they don't have a sense of the why, the mission, the vision, the goals that we're working towards, that creates a lack of people being settled in their role. And that also creates trust issues. So that's what we mean by structural. So if you are a leader that has influence, one of the things you can do to prime your environment to be a higher trust environment is to make sure the goals are really clear, to make sure the metrics that people need to be hitting are really clear. The expectations of them are really clear. Now, let's say you're not the one who sets those, right? What you can do is advocate for yourself and ask for that information if you find that leadership has not readily provided that for you. People need to know, what are they pushing towards to really be settled and feeling like a contributing part of a team. Okay, so that's one thing. Goals, your nonprofit, mission, whatever it is your big thing that you're heading for, your KPIs, your objectives, that needs to be clear and explicit for people. That's one thing. Now, coming from that, cascading from that, the second piece is that people need to have role clarity about their individual contribution to that thing. So are there job descriptions and are they accurate? Now, you will be surprised. I have worked with organizations that have been around for years. I'm talking about like decades, and people do not have clear job descriptions. So it's not a given. That role clarity, if we look at the research, it is very clear that that needs to be there for people to be able to really sit inside some trust as a team, as a member of the team. So big picture, where are we going? It's clear and communicated frequently. My individual role in that and the clarity of what my lane is, is a critical piece. So by defining those two things for people, or if you're not the one to define it, asking for that clarity, if you are the team member, we already start to increase the levels of trust that we have. Other structural things we could do to build trust. So one is helping the team create an identity together. A lot of our work in Nice Consulting is when we work with teams is doing just that. So things like setting norms, team charters, team values. What do we as a team value and try to embody? And a team value can then be scaffolded down from the organizational values, right? So if you're a leader, you can help to facilitate the team having some type of shared identity that also builds trust. Another thing, if we think about the structural or the hardware, is what are your communication structures? So we've talked about big picture mission vision. We've talked about individual role clarity. We've talked about team identity. But another piece to really building trust is, are there clear cascading communication structures? Meaning, if something rolls out from leadership, are there clear systems in how that trickles down to everybody in the organization? When we hear some people that have heard some things, but we haven't heard them, or, our colleague is telling us at lunch about X, Y, and Z that's happening at the company that affects me, but I haven't heard that, we start to have our trust kind of wavering. And so a structural piece is, what are our communication structures that allow those critical pieces of communication about what's happening at the organization, about what's happening with people's roles, the future of the company, et cetera, et cetera. How does that get cascaded down from, your executive leadership to the next level, to mid leadership and down? And so if you have some influence on this, things you are looking for are, how do we operationalize how communication is shared? So that might be in the weekly team meeting. Maybe that's a place where you have multiple people there that can hear it at once. And we have a standing item on the agenda of sharing these critical things that are important. Other things, team messaging apps. You have teams that use, organizations that use like Slack or these different messaging apps, that there are ways that we can give quick announcements that goes out to everybody. Old school email listservs. That doesn't mean that everybody is reading it, right? And so that's why we need multiple touch points for this. But ways that we can cascade that communication down as part of the structure is a way that we facilitate trust in our environments. And the last thing I'll say on the hardware is, how do we have structures that allow the team and members of the team to continue to build their capabilities? And so ways that we can train people, that we can help them get more skills, that we can cross train. What it does, as people get more capacity, it allows, of course, leadership to delegate things down so they can focus on more strategic things. But it also helps to safeguard against micromanagement when there are not only key people that know how to do one thing, but there are the resources shared. And so we are finding ways to develop the team. We're finding ways to continue to build people's capabilities. Now that might seem like, well, what does that have to do with trust? Well, trust is about my ability to share, to give my ideas, to contribute, to share my challenges, right? So the more that we continue to increase and strengthen the capabilities of our team members, not only technical, but also their interpersonal capabilities, it strengthens our capacity to build more trust on the team. Okay, so we've talked about software building trust. We've talked about hardware building trust. One thing I want to leave with you before I start going into some final points is that we do need to consider the stage of development that the team is in. Sometimes our expectations around where we should be as far as cohesion or team trust may be a little unrealistic. So for example, we work with a lot of teams when we do the kind of a team coaching work that have gone through a significant change. Maybe it's been a merger, maybe it's been a major leadership change. Maybe it's been something that's happened like a major layoff. And so then these departments with less people have to come together. That sometimes those different, especially when we talk about mergers, when we talk about reorgs, sometimes that's traumatic for people. But even if it's not traumatic, this is now a new team, even though it's people that have been here for a while that's merging. So to expect in the midst of a lot of change or a lot of movement that people would just be like 100 on trust is unrealistic. So there are different stages of team development, and you may have heard of these, forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, that just as a child grows and goes through different stages of development, so does a team. And so if a team is at a storming phase, which is meaning we are, we have a clear sense of how we're supposed to contribute, but we're not quite aligned yet, and we might disagree on the approach. Or let's go back to those teams that might be merging into one. We're used to having our own identity, and now we have to merge with you. There's some conflict there. There's some challenge there, some friction there that team has to work through. So yeah, it's not going to be 100% trust. They're going to have to work through that and build that. Does that mean that we want to stay in that space forever? No, but it does mean that we might manage our expectations around what the levels of trust look like as the team is working out and working through some of those bumpy spots. So I just want to give that for context so that we also give some grace and we also give some context to the different stages that your team might be experiencing as well. So I've been talking a lot about if you're from an influencing perspective as a leader, and we've shared a little bit about if you're more part of the team and how you can do your part to cultivate. But I will say, let's say you are not a person that has the influence and you're the person who is experiencing a low level of trust. So you don't have the capacity to really institute some of these things I've been sharing, but you also feel like the environment is not safe and that you are not feeling like you can trust in this environment. I want to just leave you with a couple of points on that. Now, one, if we go back to our disclaimer in the beginning, we are not talking about toxic environments where you are feeling like you are being harmed, abused, mistreated. That's not what we're talking about. Because if that's the case, and you have, done your due diligence or you see what's happening, that might not be something that you need to be trying to fix. You might need to just be getting out of there, okay, for your own well-being. But let's say we're not at that extreme. It is salvageable. There's some, basic human interactions that maybe need to be improved. What might you do in those settings when you are not feeling a level of trust as a member of the team? So there's a few things. And again, you use your discretion because if we're not feeling trust, this is really vulnerable for you to take a risk and do some of these things that I'm going to share might be some options for you. So use your discretion. But one of the things may be to give some feedback. If we go back to those earlier points of interpersonal with like asking people for how they need support, that's a great intentional exercise that I encourage leaders and teams to do. But sometimes people don't do that. So they're assuming what might be working for you. They are assuming what you might need to really thrive in the role, and they're wrong. And so some of it is some self-advocacy, right? You sharing what it is that's missing for you. You sharing what you need, what kind of support you need to be effective in your role. Now, this is a risk. This requires some vulnerability. It requires that you have a person, a manager, a leader, or someone that you feel like you can really bring these concerns to. But if you feel like you do have that, then the onus on you is to share what you need and to give that feedback. Okay. So that's one thing. The other thing, it might be a boundaries exercise. So it may be about you needing to set and communicate some boundaries that are important to you and that are needed for you to be successful and to thrive in that environment that maybe people don't have context of. And you might need to reiterate those boundaries a couple of times. So after you are exhausting and giving the feedback or trying to have the conversation, requesting the support you need, and you're not getting that, then it might be time that you need to escalate this, right? And so some signs that you might need to escalate is that you've done your due diligence. You have kind of gone to your manager, or maybe your manager is the one that you're feeling the lack of trust with. So you might need to escalate. Again, use your discretion, use your judgment, because you'll have to look at the lay of your organizations and the politics of your organization to see how to navigate this. But if it's worth it to you, it may be worth escalating to any type of HR, of course. If you have some type of mediation, or some organizations have a interim kind of person, or some type of mediator, if you need to go to for some challenges and things of the sort. Ideally, of course, your manager should be someone you can escalate to, but sometimes your manager might be the one that you're not feeling the trust from. So it's this first, what can I do? Is there some feedback, some self-advocacy, some requests that I might make? And if I can't do that at my level, is there some escalation that I might need to do to get some higher level support on this as well? So today we've talked about some hardware, we've talked about some software, and building trust as a team. I've given you a little bit of the background of why this is worth the investment when we look at it being the foundational piece of a high performing team. If you are a leader, then that means you have the capacity to influence. Maybe there are some structures, some feedback, some conversations you want to have to start to cultivate more trust, or get the pulse of how people are feeling already. If you are not the influencer, but you are part of the team, you might think about, what might I contribute to the team to help to cultivate this trust. So if you found this information was useful today, please share it with a friend. We are available on all streaming platforms. You can comment, like, rate, share, all the things to help us to amplify this work we're doing at Black Woman Leading. If you want to connect with us, we are at Black Woman Leading on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you'd like to connect with me personally, I am at Laura E. Knights on LinkedIn and Instagram. I would love to connect with you. To learn about our programs and events for Black women professionals and leaders, you can check out our website at blackwomanleading.com and learn about everything we have going on. And if you'd like to learn about our corporate services, our leadership development work, or our team development work, check out our corporate site at knightsconsultinggroup.com. We'd love to connect with you in any of these ways. And until next time, be well.